I wake up in the middle of the street sleepwalking. I witness a murder. I am the murderer. This is one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. I still can't believe it's real, but I know it is because there's evidence that proves it. I'm just a normal guy, born and raised in Colchester. Never been in any kind of trouble with the law before this. It started out as a typical Friday night. After work, I met up with my mates at the pub for a few pints like we do most Fridays. Just your standard boys' night out kind of thing. We hung out, watched the football match on the telly, shot some pool, and talked about our boring office jobs and uninspiring love lives like always. Around 10 p.m., I headed home, stopping at the kebab shop on the way because I was starving and love a good doner kebab after a night of drinking. When I got to my flat, I scoffed down the kebab while watching some rubbish TV show. Just a totally average night for me. I must have dozed off on the sofa because the next thing I knew, I was waking up completely confused and disoriented. But it wasn't on my sofa. I was outside, lying on the cold, hard ground of the street. The air was chilly and damp, which wasn't that unusual for a spring night in Colchester. As I slowly came to my senses, I realized I was only wearing my underpants and an old t-shirt I slept in. No shoes, no trousers, nothing else. I must have sleepwalked out of my flat and into the empty street in just my undies. How embarrassing is that? I've sleepwalked a couple of times before when I was a kid, but I couldn't remember the last time it had happened as an adult. The fact that I'd wandered outside in just my underwear was definitely a new one, though. I stood up, feeling groggy and muddle-headed, and looked around to try and get my bearings. I was on Peterman Street, only about 2 blocks away from my flat. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the vague shapes of the houses, gardens, and parked cars lining the quiet residential road. That's when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. About 50 yards up ahead, there were 2 people standing in the street. From the way they were moving, it looked like they might be fighting or struggling with each other. I froze in place, uncertain what I should do. My first instinct was to mind my own business and get the hell out of there before anyone saw me half naked. But then one of the people cried out in what sounded like pain or fear, a man's voice letting out a guttural yell. At that point, I knew I had to do something. What if someone was getting mugged or assaulted? I couldn't just walk away. Trying to be as quiet as possible, I crept a little closer to get a better look. By now, I could make out clearer shapes in the dim glow of the streetlights. It was definitely 2 guys in some kind of confrontation. One was quite a bit taller than the other. I saw something in the taller person's hand, maybe a knife or some other weapon glinting under the artificial light. Suddenly, the shorter guy turned and ran, fleeing down the street away from me. The taller guy gave chase, closing in on him rapidly. That's when I heard another yell, much louder and more drawn out than before. A horrible, blood-curdling scream that chilled me to the bone. At that point, the taller guy stopped in the middle of the street and seemed to be doing something with his hands for a few moments. Then he started walking back in my direction at an unhurried pace, as casual as could be. As the shadowy figure got closer, I could gradually make out more details. He was a big bloke, over 6 feet tall from the looks of it, with broad shoulders and a heavy build. When he passed under one of the street lamps, I caught a glimpse of his face. And that's when my feeling of dread turned into sheer, stark terror. Because the big guy's face and hands were covered in blood. Thick, dark trails of it streaking across his pale skin and dark clothing. In one meaty fist, he was gripping some kind of long, slender object that dripped with red. I stood there, frozen like a deer in headlights, helpless to move a muscle as the hulking figure approached. Part of me wanted to run and get away as fast as I could. The other part, the part that kicked into survival mode, told me to stay still and silent in the shadows as this clear threat passed by. So I held my breath, remaining as motionless as a statue, and tried to make myself invisible in the darkness. My heart was thundering inside my chest so loudly I was afraid he might hear it. As the big, bloody stranger walked by no more than 10 feet away, our eyes met for the briefest moment. He glanced over at me with a look of mild surprise that quickly turned into an eerily casual sneer. Like it was no big deal that he was covered head to toe in what looked disturbingly like fresh blood, holding some sort of dripping weapon in his grip. Then, in the most chilling moment of my life, he gave a slight, casual nod in my direction, as if to say, yeah, I see you there, but it's all good. He knew I'd witnessed the whole thing, but he didn't seem bothered at all. And with that small, dark gesture, he just kept on strolling down the street like nothing had happened. As soon as he was a safe distance away and out of sight, I bolted back to my flat as fast as I could, heart pounding with terror the whole way. After locking the door, I immediately called 999 with shaking hands and told them about the bloodshed I'd just seen. I'm pretty sure I was in shock because my voice wouldn't stop trembling and I was jumbling my words. The police showed up within minutes. Thankfully, someone else on the street had also heard the commotion and called it in. They found the victim about a block away from my building, lying dead in some bushes with multiple stab wounds. A young bloke, couldn't have been older than 25, by the looks of it. They covered his body with a white sheet while they secured the area. I told the officers everything I saw, leaving out the embarrassing part about being half-naked and sleepwalking. They took it all down in their reports and said there'd be more questions later. Once the sun came up, the police went door to door showing residents mugshots and asking if anyone recognized the suspect. I picked out the face of the blood-covered man instantly from one of the photos. It was him, no doubt about it. The gigantic, heavy-set killer with that sneer that's burned into my memory forever. As the investigation unfolded over the next few days, I learned that the victim was a local drug dealer who got into an argument with one of his customers over money or drugs or something. The customer, enraged, pulled a knife and savagely stabbed the dealer multiple times before strolling away like it was no big deal. The whole senseless act of violence over trivial nonsense. Almost as disturbing as the murder itself was the killer's cold indifference to the whole thing. He had no remorse, no guilt whatsoever about taking a human life, as far as I could tell from his dead-eyed reaction when he caught me watching. Like it was an everyday mundane thing for him to gut someone out on the street and leave them for dead. Every time I close my eyes, I see that ruddy sneer and those emotionless eyes staring back at me under the glow of the street lamp. Knowing that I'm one of the only witnesses to a brutal murder, that briefest of dark acknowledgments between us has left me shaken to the core. Just thinking about what might have happened if he'd seen me as more of a threat than a half-naked sleepwalker makes my blood run cold. Nobody else was around, at least that I could see. He could have easily decided to kill me too without any witnesses and gone on his merry way. The randomness and senselessness of the whole thing is what really gets to me. Anyway, that's my crazy story about how on one ordinary spring night, I woke up as a sleepwalking witness to a grisly murder. Ever since then, I'll never feel as safe on the streets of Colchester as I used to.
Kazan.
Title: Dark Waters. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the serene waters of Lake Viridian. It was the kind of evening that whispered promises of peace and tranquility, but beneath the surface lurked a darkness that even the bravest souls dared not confront. Nestled on the edge of the lake was a small town called Ravenwood, its quaint charm belying the secrets that lay hidden within its murky depths. For generations, the townsfolk had whispered tales of strange happenings on the lake, of ghostly apparitions and mysterious disappearances that defied explanation. Among those who called Ravenwood home was Sarah Thompson, a spirited young woman with a penchant for adventure and a curiosity that often led her into trouble. Despite the warnings of her elders, Sarah found herself drawn to the waters of Lake Viridian, the allure of its mysteries too powerful to resist. One fateful evening, as the moon hung heavy in the sky, Sarah and her friends gathered on the shore of the lake, their laughter echoing through the still night air. They had heard the stories, of course, but they were young and fearless, convinced of their own invincibility. As they set out onto the water in a rickety old boat, the darkness seemed to close in around them, swallowing them whole. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull, a haunting melody that seemed to beckon them further into the unknown. But as they ventured deeper into the heart of the lake, a sense of unease began to creep over them, a feeling that they were not alone. Sarah's friends laughed it off, dismissing her fears as nothing more than childish superstition, but she could not shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, without warning, the boat lurched to a halt, sending Sarah and her friends tumbling into the icy waters below. Panic set in as they struggled to stay afloat, their screams drowned out by the darkness that surrounded them. As they thrashed about in the water, Sarah caught a glimpse of something moving beneath the surface, something sinister and malevolent. It was then that she knew they were not alone, that they had ventured into a world beyond their understanding, a world ruled by darkness and despair. Desperate to escape, Sarah fought against the current, her muscles burning with exertion as she propelled herself towards the shore. But the harder she struggled, the tighter the grip of the lake became, pulling her deeper into its murky depths. Just when all hope seemed lost, a hand reached out from the darkness, pulling Sarah to safety with a strength that defied explanation. Gasping for breath, she looked up to see the face of her savior, a figure shrouded in shadow with eyes that burned with a fierce intensity. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely more than a hoarse whisper. "I am the guardian of the lake," the figure replied, his voice like thunder in the stillness of the night. "And you have trespassed upon my domain." With a wave of his hand, the waters of Lake Viridian receded, revealing the twisted forms of Sarah's friends as they lay motionless on the shore. Horror washed over her as she realized the true nature of the darkness that lurked within the depths, a darkness that hungered for the souls of the living. In that moment, Sarah knew that she would never be the same again, that the horrors she had witnessed would haunt her for the rest of her days. But as she gazed out across the dark waters of Lake Viridian, she also knew that some secrets were better left buried, lest they consume us all in their endless hunger for power. Title: The Cellar of Souls. The old house stood on the edge of town, its crumbling facade a testament to the passage of time. Ivy crawled up the weathered walls, and the windows stared out like empty eye sockets, devoid of life. Few dared to venture near, for the whispers that surrounded it spoke of dark secrets and unspeakable horrors. Among the brave souls who dared to approach was a group of friends, their laughter echoing through the stillness of the night. They were young and fearless, convinced of their own invincibility and eager to unlock the mysteries that lay hidden within the old house's walls. Leading the way was Jake, a charismatic young man with a devil-may-care attitude and a penchant for adventure. His friends followed close behind, their hearts pounding with anticipation as they stepped through the rotting doorway and into the darkness beyond. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floorboards creaked beneath their feet as they made their way deeper into the bowels of the house. It was then that they stumbled upon it, hidden beneath a trapdoor in the floor, a staircase leading down into the depths of the earth. With a sense of trepidation, they descended into the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls as they ventured further into the unknown. The air grew colder with each step, and a sense of unease settled over them like a shroud. At last, they reached the bottom of the stairs and found themselves standing before a heavy wooden door, its surface etched with strange symbols and sigils. With a sense of foreboding, Jake pushed open the door and stepped into the room beyond. What they found inside took their breath away. A vast chamber filled with row upon row of shelves, each one stacked high with jars and bottles containing strange and otherworldly specimens. Some contained twisted creatures with gnarled limbs and glowing eyes, while others held objects of unknown origin, their purpose shrouded in mystery. But it was the jars lining the far wall that caught their attention, a collection of human souls, trapped within their glass prisons and condemned to an eternity of torment. Their screams echoed off the stone walls, filling the chamber with a cacophony of agony and despair. As they gazed upon the horror before them, a sense of dread washed over Jake and his friends, threatening to consume them in its icy grip. For they knew now that they had stumbled upon something beyond their comprehension, something ancient and malevolent that hungered for their souls. With a sense of urgency, they turned to leave, but as they reached for the door, they found it sealed shut, trapping them inside with the horrors that lurked within. Panic set in as they searched for a way out, but the walls seemed to close in around them, suffocating them in their suffocating embrace. And then, in the darkness, they heard it, a whisper, soft and insidious, like the voice of a serpent tempting them with promises of power and glory. It spoke of sacrifices and rituals, of dark bargains struck in the shadows, and Jake knew then that they were not alone. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Jake turned to face the source of the voice, and there, Standing before him was a figure shrouded in darkness, its eyes burning with a fierce intensity. It was the keeper of the cellar, the guardian of the souls that lay trapped within its walls, and it hungered for their blood. With a scream of terror, Jake and his friends fled into the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls as they raced towards the surface. But no matter how fast they ran, the darkness pursued them, its tendrils reaching out to drag them back into the depths from which they had come. And as they stumbled out into the moonlit night, gasping for breath and trembling with fear, they knew that they had escaped only by the narrowest of margins, and that the horrors of the cellar would haunt them for the rest of their days, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. The Dollmaker's secret. Deep in the heart of the Black Forest, nestled among the ancient pines and twisted oaks, stood the ramshackle cottage of Old Wilhelm, the Dollmaker. From the outside, it appeared quaint and unassuming, but those who peered too closely through the warped glass of its windows would see fleeting visions that chilled the blood, porcelain faces locked in rictus grins, lifeless eyes that seemed to follow one's movements, and limbs bent at disturbing angles. The villagers avoided the place like a plague house, making the sign of the cross whenever they passed by on the old forest road. Strange sounds could sometimes be heard drifting through the trees at night, the eerie lullabies of a madman mingled with the mournful tinkle of chisel on china. Rumors persisted of missing children, unholy rituals, and the vengeful spirits of the woods. Yet none could say precisely what transpired behind those weathered walls, for Old Wilhelm had not ventured into the village in decades. His only contact with the outside world came from the occasional peddler brave enough to approach the cottage, seeking to buy or trade the Dollmaker's wares. The most intrepid of these roving traders would return to the villages with amazing, lifelike dolls to sell at obscene markups. Dolls so realistic they seemed to move of their own volition, blinking and breathing as if possessed by some dark sorcery. It was one of these peddlers, a wily old codger named Zacher, who brought word of the Dollmaker's latest creation to the manor house at the edge of the village. Wilhelm's previous dolls had become coveted rarities among the aristocracy, fetching small fortunes from the wealthy and bizarre. So when Zacher arrived before the iron gates cradling an exquisite porcelain figurine in his arms, a small riot nearly broke out among the household staff. "Make way! Make way!" the crafty peddler shouted over the din as he bustled up the front steps. The masterwork of Old Wilhelm himself. A treasure beyond price, I tell you. The major domo swept open the doors to admit Zacher, his eyes widening at the intricate beauty of the doll. It was modeled in the form of a young girl of perhaps 10 years, with flawless alabaster features and a cascade of golden curls. Every delicate detail was captured perfectly, from the lace trim of her azure frock to the pale rosebud lips slightly parted as if to speak. Only the doll's eyes were blanks, empty black sockets meant to be painted or inset with glass eyes later. "Where did you find such a prize?" the master of the house asked, scarcely able to tear his gaze away from the spellbinding craftsmanship. "Direct from the old devil's workshop, sir," Zacher replied with a greedy smile. I braved the dark paths myself to secure this peerless treasure. And what is your asking price for such an objet d'art? The peddler's smile widened to show a mouthful of crooked, yellowing teeth. "For you, good sir? Let us say, 100 gold pieces." The master's eyes narrowed, but after examining the doll again his shoulders sagged in resignation. "So be it, then. But I shall require proof that the foul thing harbors no evil magics." Chuckling coldly, Zacher laid the porcelain girl on a velvet-draped table under the gaze of a crucifix upon the wall. He then produced a long iron nail from his coat and grinned lecherously. "Just watch, sir." With a sickening crunch, the peddler drove the thick nail directly into the doll's perfect face, shattering the porcelain and embedding steel deep into the sculpted features. A collective gasp went up from the assembled servants, but Zacher merely wiped his hands on his cloak. "There, you see? Just an exquisite doll crafted by human hands," he proclaimed. "No foul trickery afoot, and worth every gilded coin." The incident clearly left the master. Here is more of the horror story, The Dollmaker's Secret. The incident clearly left the master discomfited, but he motioned for his steward to pay the peddler his askance price. As Zachar cackled and pocketed the heavy purse of gold, the master could not help feeling a tinge of revulsion at the final touch the old wretch had added to the doll's ruined visage. A leering, toothless grin carved into the cracked porcelain, as if mocking him. That night, by the light of a beeswax taper, the nobleman carefully removed the iron nail from the shattered doll's face and set about repairing the damage as best he could with powdered porcelain and a botanical primer. He worked late into the night, meticulously brushing layers of the bone-white slip over the broken areas until the macabre grin and hole were concealed once more behind the doll's flawless mask. As he surveyed his handiwork by candlelight, the master could not suppress a shudder at how convincingly lifelike the porcelain girl appeared now, almost as if she might open her eyes and smile at him at any moment. Suddenly fatigued from his labors, he extinguished the candle and hobbled off to his bedchamber, leaving the doll seated on his work table with a whispered good night. The next morning, the nobleman's valet let out a horrified shriek upon entering his master's study. There, slumped across the table in a congealing pool of his own blood, was his master's lifeless form, his throat savagely slashed and parallel gashes carved deeply into his face in a rictus mimicking the doll's shattered grin. And seated before him, nails still protruding from her shattered features, but now flanked by two glistening obsidian eyes, was the porcelain girl herself. The surreal murder set the entire region into an uproar, with rumors spreading like wildfire from village to village about the evil dollmaker's doll come to life. A coven of cunning folk was summoned to investigate, though their inscrutability only deepened the mystery. They confirmed that the doll gave off no aura of magic whatsoever, nor any trace of earthly craftsman's hand, almost as if she was an ordinary children's plaything awoken into sentient malevolence by some nameless Faustian pact. Terrified, the household staff gathered what meager belongings they could and fled the blood-stained manor, leaving the doll seated alone in the gloomy study amid the slowly putrefying remains of their former master. Some claimed to have seen the porcelain face turn slightly as they hurried away, eyes following their retreat and lips parting in a cruel smile of triumph. The village priest was next to take up the haunted doll's vigil, attempting to exorcise or banish the evil presence through prayer, chrism, and invocations. Yet each time the horrified holy man entered the study, he would find the crucifix overturned and the Bible's pages scattered amid signs of a violent struggle, once with every mirror and pane of glass shattered in a burst of projectile force. Finally, the bravest men of the village constructed a stout oaken box banded with iron, its lid crossbarred with thick-set nails driven through sigils of warding against evil. And under the light of a crimson hunter's moon, the cackling porcelain horror was imprisoned within this vessel, its hellish laughter echoing from the crate even as it was lowered by chains into an abandoned well until only muffled thumps could be heard from the icy depths. For years afterward, the villagers would claim that on certain moonless nights they still heard that same deranged, childish giggling drifting up from the sealed well shaft, as if the doll still persisted somewhere in the damp shadows below, patiently biding its time. And in the dusty depths of the Black Forest, the dollmaker's cottage gradually surrendered to decay and encroaching wilderness, its secrets forever locked away, until, one fateful Walpurgisnacht, a pair of hapless foresters awoke something that should have remained dormant for all eternity. As the twin full moons rose over the twisted treeline that night, the men saw the cottage's door gape open in a gust of foul. The Cellar of Souls. The old house stood on the edge of town, its crumbling facade a testament to the passage of time. Ivy crawled up the weathered walls, and the windows stared out like empty eye sockets, devoid of life. Few dared to venture near, for the whispers that surrounded it spoke of dark secrets and unspeakable horrors. Among the brave souls who dared to approach was a group of friends, their laughter echoing through the stillness of the night. They were young and fearless, convinced of their own invincibility and eager to unlock the mysteries that lay hidden within the old house's walls. Leading the way was Jake, a charismatic young man with a devil-may-care attitude and a penchant for adventure. His friends followed close behind, their hearts pounding with anticipation as they stepped through the rotting doorway and into the darkness beyond. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floorboards creaked beneath their feet as they made their way deeper into the bowels of the house. It was then that they stumbled upon it, hidden beneath a trapdoor in the floor, a staircase leading down into the depths of the earth. With a sense of trepidation, they descended into the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls as they ventured further into the unknown. The air grew colder with each step, and a sense of unease settled over them like a shroud. At last, they reached the bottom of the stairs and found themselves standing before a heavy wooden door, its surface etched with strange symbols and sigils. With a sense of foreboding, Jake pushed open the door and stepped into the room beyond. What they found inside took their breath away. A vast chamber filled with row upon row of shelves, each one stacked high with jars and bottles containing strange and otherworldly specimens. Some contained twisted creatures with gnarled limbs and glowing eyes, while others held objects of unknown origin, their purpose shrouded in mystery. But it was the jars lining the far wall that caught their attention. A collection of human souls, trapped within their glass prisons and condemned to an eternity of torment. Their screams echoed off the stone walls, filling the chamber with a cacophony of agony and despair. As they gazed upon the horror before them, a sense of dread washed over Jake and his friends, threatening to consume them in its icy grip. For they knew now that they had stumbled upon something beyond their comprehension, something ancient and malevolent that hungered for their souls. With a sense of urgency, they turned to leave, but as they reached for the door, they found it sealed shut, trapping them inside with the horrors that lurked within. Panic set in as they searched for a way out, but the walls seemed to close in around them, suffocating them in their suffocating embrace. And then, in the darkness, they heard it, a whisper, soft and insidious, like the voice of a serpent tempting them with promises of power and glory. It spoke of sacrifices and rituals, of dark bargains struck in the shadows, and Jake knew then that they were not alone. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Jake turned to face the source of the voice, and there, standing before him, was a figure shrouded in darkness, its eyes burning with a fierce intensity. It was the keeper of the cellar, the guardian of the souls that lay trapped within its walls, and it hungered for their blood. With a scream of terror, Jake and his friends fled into the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls as they raced towards the surface. But no matter how fast they ran, the darkness pursued them, its tendrils reaching out to drag them back into the depths from which they had come. And as they stumbled out into the moonlit night, gasping for breath and trembling with fear, they knew that they had escaped only by the narrowest of margins, and that the horrors of the cellar would haunt them for the rest of their days, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all.